All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Extraordinary Family Life podcast. We are going to do this episode we have hinted at and have been hesitant about, but actually...
Or, as I was saying, we're going to do an episode we probably shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. She's like, you're not going to do that, are you? I'm like, yeah.
But we are going to do it.
We're going to do it.
And I just want to say probably the biggest reason we are going to do it, well, the biggest reason we shouldn't do it is because we generally try to stay out of politics. Like, we're apolitical is what we call ourselves. And we've been that way for a long time, like many years, when we've traveled the world and when we've created the life of our dreams, which we have done. I mean, it's all been, of course, we have political viewpoints, but we don't consider ourselves political people.
Sometimes we just decide not to have political viewpoints because it's something that's been politicized.
Yes.
And we're like, let's just look at the principle. Let's look at the practice.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Like, I want to get that point, but I'm saying, like, we don't usually make podcasts, videos, or talk about political topics because we like to stay outside of that.
Right.
So this isn't something we would normally do, talk about a topic that's become politicized. I want to emphasize that because this isn't a political topic, it's just become politicized.
Right, they've used it that way.
Right, and so we want to make that clarifying point because I think that's a very key point to understanding this, is that it is something that's not normally political, but it has become politicized.
Big time. And what's interesting, I guess the driving force for me is we have people, sincerely reaching out and saying, hey, what's the best way to think about this? Like, how do I wrap my head around it? How do I see the big picture of this? Which we love to do that. Of like, okay, let's back way out and not see this for what it is in this moment, in this space. Let's go out across time and place and see a bigger picture, because it helps us think more clearly about it. So this is my driving force. So I'm like, okay, well, what are the things that have led to help me think differently about this issue and all kinds of issues?
Yeah, exactly.
Really about death and health in general and practices and where each of us stands, and it's going to be different for everybody. But like, how did I come to those conclusions? And as I've thought through it, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to share that process.
Right.
I want to share the journey.
Well, because that is the process we have used throughout our life and throughout our marriage. Like, we've used this process of viewing the world not from a political lens, because we see that becomes so myopic, but through a zoomed out lens to look at it from multiple angles, like the rotisserie chicken, right? And to look at it across domains of knowledge. So we're looking at it from a philosophical, psychological, biological, religious, all these different perspectives to see, okay, if it fits across these things, then that's more likely that that's true. Right. Instead of like, we're looking at it here myopically, and based on this information right here, this is true. And you're like, oh, you can't do that.
Right.
Like, that's just not how we've ever come to any conclusions in our life about anything we've done. Like, you just can't do that.
And interestingly, if you only look at that small pocket and you only talk to people with your same views, you're on this little revolving door of confirmation bias. Yeah, exactly. You're like, see, well, there it is again, see.
Exactly. And that's why we wanted to do this together, because we have differing views and we think that that's a great thing. That's a strength.
Rachel loves correcting my confirmation bias.
And you love correcting my confirmation bias. But I think that makes our overall viewpoints, or our combined viewpoints, healthier and more balanced, because we're not afraid to analyze or criticize
or be wrong.
Or be wrong, right?
So whenever you take a perspective, there's always going to be a limitation on any perspective, because that's exactly what it is. It's just a perspective.
Yeah.
And so there'll always be a limitation, and we are limited. It might be wrong, but we want to share some ideas.
There's always two sides to every story, and then there's the truth.
And then the truth. So what you're getting today is two sides of a story, and somewhere in there's going to be some truth.
Exactly.
And so, anyways, let's dive in.
So again, we're talking about the vaccine, but we're not talking about the vaccine.
Right.
And we're not talking about the vaccine in a way to try and convince you of one opinion or the other, or that one political viewpoint is right and the other is wrong. Now, you may come to some of those conclusions on your own. That's up to you and what your thought process is at the time. But our sincere belief is that we don't know all the information. I don't think anyone knows all the information. I think it will be 10 or 20 years before we look back on time and say, oh, guess what? Look back in history and say, this is what happened during that time. And right now we're in the middle of it trying to figure it out. We can't know. And so, yes, we have some viewpoints that we've come to, and we're going to share some of the information we're looking at, asking questions about, considering, wondering, all of that stuff. But it's from this zoomed out viewpoint and lens of, let's look across domains of knowledge and not just at the political what's the word? Political.
Well, it's the political trend, like what's hot right now, what's being stirred up, what's being really just kind of fed at us, and
focused on.
They're trying to shock you, and there's a lot of tension, and that, man, that's worth addressing maybe later. But they're putting a lot of tension, a lot of animosity. Almost sometimes some people are just feeding this hatred, which we talked about last time, but like that, it's feeding into the biggest problem. So let's back out, and I'll start with my kind of little journey of where this started. This was easily over a decade ago, and I was reading a great book, right? And almost all of our journey starts with reading a great book. And I was reading from this book, and the author, just in passing to make a point, he said something about the amount of people killed during this period of war, the amount of people killed on the roadways in the United States from drunk drivers. And the number was significant. And he just said it in passing, and it's kind of a point. I was like, whoa, that's a lot. So I jumped on, and I'm like, well, how many people are dying now from drunk drivers? And what are the causes of death? And so again, 10, 12, 15 years ago, it pops up.
Well, you honestly have been geeking out about numbers. I mean, he's always telling us, and this has been happening for like 10 years. Did you know this many number of people die from blah, 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 whatever every year? Like, this has been going on for a while. For a year, and I kind of, it's weird, like, and I tell people, I'm like, I'm geeking out about the causes and numbers of death, like how many people are dying, because it's an indicator, right? Mm-hmm. It's always an indicator of like, whoa, it's a symptom of a bigger problem. Right.
But here's what I have seen as the problem is when this whole COVID thing started coming up, and they were reporting numbers of deaths every day. And if people aren't aware of how many people are dying every day anyways,
which I already was, I'm
like, oh yeah, man, there's a few thousand people die every single day in this country. In fact, I want to do the math right now, just to geek out a little bit here.
Because this is what Greg does.
Let's see if I can get enough zeros right here. That's it right there, right? And
what's the number supposed to be?
3.6 million people died in 2020. So that is
900, almost 10,000 people a day.
Holy cow, it's bigger than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was a few thousand. So just shy of 10,000 people died every day in 2020.
Not only because of
only a small percentage of that was COVID.
Well, we should get the number.
We will. I got them all. I got all the exact numbers. I'm going to geek out here a little bit and share this, and I hope you guys appreciate, even if you don't like the statistics or the numbers or whatever, like, just see the magnitude of it. And so all along I'm like, okay, there's thousands of people dying from preventable diseases every day. And I had some friends. I had a good friend in Costa Rica who was a cardiologist, and he was a world-renowned cardiologist. He traveled all over the earth presenting. And he would just get so fired up, and I met with him a lot, and we talked about it. He would get so fired up. He's like, so many people die in all of these, like the most developed countries. He was flying around Europe and Australia, and he's a friend from Costa Rica, and the U.S., and he's like, it's these developed countries where they're dying of preventable heart disease in insane numbers. Well, right. He's like, we can stop this. We can do something about this.
In developing countries, preventable causes are the leading
causes of death. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Preventable things, right?
Preventable things.
So I knew this from years back, and I'm like, yeah, there's thousands of people dying every single day. But if you don't know that, And who does? Who goes around thinking, I wonder how many people died today?
Besides Greg Denny.
Right? Besides someone who came across it on accident, right? And I'm like, well, that's fascinating. It really just shocked me back then. I'm like, I didn't realize that many people die every day.
So wait, hold on though. Let's even clarify even further. Although I'm asking a question because I don't know. Does that number of 10,000, almost 10,000 people per day include things like car accidents?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. These are just deaths in the United States. Now, in 2020,
United States only,
yep, United States only. 2020, it was actually higher, and there was a chunk because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking about the other causes, and actually major rises in death in 2020
in other sources.
in other areas. So it
that
caused,
may or may not have been as a
it
cause
was
of.
right. It was totally related, and not causation, but correlation. There's definitely correlation in a massive rise in deaths in other areas because of what was going on in 2020. So if you don't know that and you don't think about it, and then all you hear on the news is like this many people died, this many people died, this many people, you're sitting back going,
People are dying.
people are dying. We've got to do something about this. But never once did I hear them say, well, actually, today and every single day throughout 2020, more people died of preventable heart disease than from COVID. Let that sink in. Every single day, on average, if you average it out across here, every single day, more people died from preventable heart disease, and I'm going to give you the whole list and you'll be blown away, than from COVID.
Now, some of those people that died from preventable heart disease died with COVID.
Exactly. Yep. So there's a part of that.
But
So then,
only a
okay,
percentage.
but that even makes the number even bigger. Then no, this is like direct separation. If you just separate it out, but yeah, you're right. That a lot of the people who died with COVID,
Because the ones who were dying of preventable heart disease but had COVID were marked as a COVID death.
sure, or COVID sped up their death,
Their death.
right? And again, as we talk about death, I don't want you to think we're heartless and we just think 10,000 people, what do you do? Like we've lost family members. Rachel and I watched her father pass away from cancer, colon cancer. We're going to talk about cancer. And my brother just died recently. So from drug overdose, which was also on the number. So
includes this 10,000.
Yes, part of the 10,000 a day in 2020 was a major increase in drug overdoses, right? Which I think we can all agree that there was at least some correlation to what was happening in 2020 that was leading to some of these other things. And you guys, today, I really, as much as I possibly can, I want to try to share things that I think wherever you are on the spectrum of politics or beliefs or whatever, I want to try to share as many things as possible that we can all just say, yep, we can all agree on, for the most part. We can all agree on. And so we're going to come across those and address some of those issues. But we just have to stop. And I don't want you to think we're heartless. Like, we care. I know each death is significant. It really is.
It's affecting
Families
dozens,
and
hundreds
marriages
of people,
and children. And like, it's tough. But it's also a big picture perspective. When you zoom out and you see it differently, you realize, okay, 10,000 people die every single day in this country. That's not insignificant. And it's not, what it brings back to is like, oh, okay, well, people are dying every day, all the time, from all kinds of causes, most of which I would say are preventable.
Things like smoking, things like...
Well, we'll get into that, right? We'll hit all the numbers.
So one of the things that we want to get into, but I guess I'm going to mention it right now, is that if any of these other causes of death, like even heart disease, was to be focused on in the media and social media, in conversations, if it was to become an area of focus, like COVID has, then it would also become politicized, like COVID has. So I guess that's kind of the framework we're wanting to talk about here, is like we all need to back out for a minute and look at this from all angles and all sides, use the rotisserie chicken here, and think, okay, let's look at COVID, not that it's not insignificant, but look at it from a context in compared to these other issues, other concerns, other causes of death. And also realize that if those other causes of death were reported every single day on the news, in the government, that they would also be as intensified as COVID is at the moment. I don't know that, like, there's an argument you can make against that
Right.
point.
Right.
That, from everything I can look at, I don't think that we could disagree on that.
What they've done is they've taken one issue and put it right in front of our faces,
Right.
and really charged it with emotion and fear.
Right.
Now, obviously, it is unique. It has some uniqueness. So we
absolutely.
could argue like, well, this is different than heart disease,
Yes,
and you're right,
absolutely.
you could. But so I just did the math right now because in 2020, I remember the number because it stood out. 690,822 people died of preventable heart disease. Well, most of which was preventable, not all of it. But we'll just say heart disease. So 690,822 people died of heart disease in 2022 or 2020. And
2022,
I just
is this
did
a prediction?
I just did the math. It is 1,892 people every day. If that
from preventable heart disease.
well, most of which is preventable,
From
right?
heart
From heart
disease,
disease.
sorry.
So if that was on the news every day, like, hey, 2,000 people, 2,000 more people died today from heart disease. We special report tonight of what's causing it and what you can do to prevent it. And if that were brought into front of attention, it would change things.
Well, we
in fact,
have-
more people, way more people. So let me give this context. I was going to do this later, but I'll hit it right now. So at 690,000, only as of today, at the time of this recording, total number of deaths attributed to COVID, and again,
In the United States.
and again, even sites that I disagree with are saying, hey, not all of those can be fully blamed on COVID, right? There's a big difference between the underlying cause of death and a contributing cause of death, right? So we can't agree, but as of the time of this recording, it's 676,000 people. So
Now wait,
more people total
676,000 people died
of COVID.
of COVID as an underlying cause or a contributing cause, or
Just
both?
Both.
Okay.
Everything. And I think most people are in agreement that some of those deaths were even like, hey, if they had COVID, go ahead and put it on the death certificate.
Or the memes you see of like,
Right.
he died in a car accident, but it was
COVID.
Okay.
Right?
But-
and again, we're not going extreme, but I think we can all agree again that some of those, and again, hospital administration will tell you, like, hey, there was so much funding that if COVID was even a slight factor.
Where do you get that information?
Well, okay,
That needs
so
to
we'll
be
back up. Yep,
verifiable.
we'll back up. We'll leave that alone. But even at 676,000,
Well, that's in 18
Total.
months, though.
well, almost, we're coming up almost on 2 years. So, yeah,
Okay.
18 months is conservative in 18 months, but this is in a 12-month period. More people died of heart disease in a 12-month period than COVID in an 18-month period. So it's not just about pure numbers.
Right.
And we get into the other number. Man, I keep saying we get into it. Maybe
Because-
let's just go.
Well, right, we should. But because if we were focusing on the number of deaths happening from heart disease every day, then you would see people on social media saying, you people that eat at McDonald's are just the worst.
Or what would happen is it'd start getting so polarized because of the current environment. Man, you'd have hate crimes against people working at fast food restaurants and saying, you are murderers. You people are murder. And then they would be attacking the companies that make processed and packaged foods.
Right.
And
And
the
that
sugar
sounds-
industry. It's crazy, but look at what's
sounds
happening.
funny or crazy that we would even be saying that, and yet, can any of us argue that if that was the focus in the media, because they're saying these are verifiable deaths, people are dying from these things,
Yep. And
and
they
so
know
we
causes.
have to do something. Well, right, they know the cause. We have to do something to put a stop to it. Now, of course, there's the argument that, well, heart disease isn't contagious, like a virus. So there's less fear there because people aren't afraid that you're going to pass them heart disease, per se. So there is a different element there.
That's a
which
perfect.
is-
Oh, good. That's a perfect lead into another perspective. So let's just zoom back out again. Another perspective that we love to get from studying history and literally traveling all over the world, talking to people, learning about different events. And again, the whole idea here is like, let's zoom out. Or go around the backside and get a totally different perspective. Unfortunately, early on when they came out, like, okay, this could be a major, serious epidemic. It scared a lot of people, including us.
We're
like, oh
absolutely.
man, if this is real deal, like we gotta buckle down.
In fact, we at first thought it was going to be very serious. It was going to be very deadly. That was our initial take on the research we had done.
And they were portraying it as such. And so you go back through history.
We started self-quarantining before quarantine was required.
We're like, we're going to take this serious. We sat the kids
because
down.
We didn't
we're like,
want we have, family that are in high-risk groups, and we did not want to put them at risk. So we were doing this ahead of the curve, in a way.
Because we thought that it would be big. Big as in, here's a perfect example. In 1918, the H1N1 flu, the influenza, spread across the world with rapid fire. They estimate that 500 million people were infected and 50 million died.
Okay.
Let that sink in. 50
million.
million deaths in 1918. That's a 10% death rate. That's massive.
And initially we were thinking that's what this could be.
If this could be, or even, you guys, I read these histories about, lots of history. I read lots of histories. One of the recent ones that really kind of hit me hard was the settling of the Ohio River Valley when the settlers came in and just moved east and went to the Ohio River Valley. The flu had come through there, and it came through a few years in a row, and each winter a large percentage of the people died.
Well,
right? And it was so much so that the rest of the settlers were at risk of death because like all the blacksmiths died. Right? So it's like us saying, well, we're concerned about hospitals being full and overcrowded, which we could talk about that, but
what would happen if all the doctors died?
If all the doctors died, or if all all the guys who run the internet companies, they all die. Like,
and nobody knows anything about.
What do you do? What do you do without internet? Nobody can fix the internet, or all the electricians, or all the plumbers. Like, they all died. Like, what would happen to our society if all the plumbers got this real? And that's what we're talking about with these huge numbers.
Well,
at a 10% death rate.
Yeah.
So, let's compare it now to COVID.
Yeah, I want to do that comparison. This reminded me that when I read the book 1491 about...
Yes, I was actually put that in my notes.
Well,
no, go there. Go there.
So, there's this great book called 1491. Who is the author? I don't remember his name.
I can't remember.
Anyways, it's about what the world was like before Columbus discovered it, right? Which he didn't actually discover it, but before things changed... Columbus was kind of a turning point. He did drastically change the world after his journeys and stuff. But anyways, one of the things that happened with him coming across to the Americas was the spreading of disease. They brought all these diseases which they were immune to in the old world, but they brought it to the new world, and that was one of the major contributing reasons for them to be able to colonize the New World was because so many of the indigenous people died off from diseases that were brought.
Do you remember some estimates?
I would have to look at it. It's been like 10 years since I read the book. It was significantly, ridiculously
like
high.
80% or 90%, I remember.
I don't know if I would say that high, but it was, I think
it
was over 50%
high.
for sure.
So more than half of the population
was wiped out. They were dying from smallpox and, diseases we don't have now, but they had brought it from the old world and killed off populations, and that was what allowed more of it wasn't just the violence, from them coming in and killing them off. A lot of them died from disease.
Right.
So anyways.
So then we all have to stop and back up and say, wow, even if it were at 10%, which is crazy.
And we can all agree that it's not anywhere near 10%.
Well, I'll give you the exact numbers from right today that we just did the calculations on. But even if it was 10%, 90 out of 100 people would survive. Society goes on. Yeah, it's a tragedy. It is an absolute tragedy. We would all personally know people who would pass away, and it would be significant, and there would be a massive, massive impact. That would be turned into millions of people, just the United States alone. And that would be huge. But still, if you back out and say, well, still 90 out of 100 survived, it's still good odds, right? But then the numbers as of today, with estimated infections, and again, not all the infections are reported, not all the positive tests, because not everybody goes and gets tested, and not everybody reports when they have it.
And not everyone who gets tested is positive.
Right.
Now, we're saying this from our own personal experience because we've had COVID twice that we're pretty sure of.
Yeah, so we can't say 100%, but boy, we had all the symptoms, including loss of smell and taste.
And the first time we got it in February 2020 after traveling to Thailand and South Korea. We came back. The whole family got COVID. It wasn't fun. I'm not going to say, like, COVID's fun or not a big deal. Like, I don't want to get COVID. It's not a fun disease. It's, for us, it made us very lethargic, tired, all of that. And then the second time we got it was just probably last month, right?
Yep.
The first time we went to get tested, and both of us tested negative. Even though we're like, if this isn't COVID, I don't know what it is. Because we've traveled a lot. So we've been exposed to a lot of different sicknesses and illnesses. The second time we didn't even go to get tested. Although we knew it was COVID because we had like every single symptom, including loss of smell and taste.
Yeah.
So we're adding that as information because every person.
And our whole family got it, and we didn't go, our numbers don't show up.
Right. We don't show up at all because our whole family of 8 or 9, because our daughter had it the first time, did not go to report that we actually had COVID.
And I know lots of people
We're not
same
the
thing.
only ones.
This is happening. So, anyways, but take the numbers exactly as they are, and you do the calculation.
Which does not include what we just talked about.
Right, and you do the calculation. At worst case scenarios, it is 1.5%.
Well, let's give the numbers exactly because.
Well, I got it right here.
I thought it was interesting.
It is 42.3 million confirmed cases in the U.S. and 676,000 deaths.
And if you
take that number and divide it, it is 1.5%.
Okay. And you were saying with the Spanish flu, it was 500 million cases?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
And 50
was that
million
worldwide?
deaths.
Or
Yeah, worldwide. That was worldwide. That was worldwide.
We don't have the worldwide numbers right now.
And so, the percentages.
So at 42.
It's significant.
At 42 million with 676,000 deaths, that's 1.5%.
Yep.
Death rate.
Fatality rate. Death rate. Right. Now, if you look at the numbers, and again, you can find this.
That's from the CDC.
Yeah, and you guys, you can go look on any website that again, we're trying to share things I think we can all agree on. So some of you are like, well, I don't trust those websites. And some of you are like, well, I don't trust those websites. I think across the board, any website you go look at, you're going to find that the fatality rates above 49 years old go up a little bit, and then above 69 years old, they go up a lot. So the bulk of the deaths are above 69. Really below 49, it is the survival rate is so high. It's like 99.8 or sometimes 99.9 that it's hardly even significant. So anyone who's in decent health and below 69, especially below 49, has such a low risk. It almost doesn't show up on the charts. And again, you can find those numbers on any website you trust.
Well, and I think that kind of we use the CDC because on both sides, people are at least gravitating to that as a source of
they're trying to find some solid information.
But you're right. There could be on the left or the right or whatever viewpoint you have, those numbers are going to be either more extreme or less extreme, but at least the CDC is kind of a middle point. Some people might say, I don't believe the CDC at all, right? And then, okay, that's fair. But most people are at least going to use it as a reference point.
Right. So let's look at, again, we're just trying to get big perspective.
Big perspective, and the goal is unpoliticized perspective. We're
Yes.
trying to view it from a non-political viewpoint as much as possible, just by backing out and saying, okay, how does this fit into the bigger picture? How does it fit into, because again, it's not like we're saying COVID deaths don't matter. COVID isn't important. But we are trying to say, how does COVID fit into
in the
everything
big picture
else that's going on?
Yeah, and all the deaths that are happening all the time, and the real big epidemics and pandemics that have happened in the past. And when you give it a different perspective, when you change your angle on anything, you can ask different questions. So it makes me ask, well, like, okay, these kind of numbers, is a vaccine necessary, right? And you can answer that question. And then you're like, well, these numbers and percentages, is it mandatory for everybody? Do we need to vaccinate a certain percentage or all? Or is it really the death sentence that some people still believe it is? And is it really as dangerous, right? It's
because we're trying to ask the question, is all the hype, excitement, fear, polarization around COVID, around the vaccine, is that due to the fact that it is as serious as we initially thought it was going to be? Or is it due to the fact that it has become politicized?
right.
That's one of the points. Because if you can start to see...
Okay. Keep going.
If you can start to see that something has become politicized, right? Because again, there's a difference.
Or even brought into the media is what I was going to say. They
That
just
too.
bring it into focus, and it makes it seem a lot bigger than it is.
Almost by nature politicizes
Right.
things, because I
Right.
think the nature of mainstream media is to politicize things. So is it that way because it's been politicized by the mainstream media, by government, or is it that way because it is that way? Does that make sense?
Right. And so, again, backing out, changing the perspective gives you a different way to look at this. So the reality is, again, not our opinion here, the reality is more people die every day from other preventable causes, and we're going to hit that right now, I think, than from COVID. And you're more likely to die, again, just looking pure numbers, just pure statistics, you're more likely to die of these other causes than you are of COVID. So then that begs the question, shouldn't we as a nation be giving that more attention if we're really truly about saving lives?
Maybe. I was going to say the irony as well is that for some of these leading causes of death, which you're going to go over, they're also leading contributing causes or leading contributors to death by COVID. Right?
Say that again.
Some of the leading causes of death, like heart disease.
Okay, some of the other ones we're going to hit right now
are also leading contributing factors to death by COVID.
Yes.
So there's actually crossover there.
Yes. What's really fascinating, and we can hit that right now. Okay, let's do this real quick. Inside of COVID, what they're finding, there are factors that are making it
making more susceptible to it.
Well, more susceptible. Yeah, that's the other stuff we'll hit. But when you get it, make your symptoms or your reactions to it far more severe or more likely to die. And they found out 3 really significant ones. This is on the CDC. You can go read it. They have found now, this kind of watching it, they said there was 3 factors worth reporting that really increased the probability of severe symptoms or death. Number 1, which won't surprise us, is obesity. So quite literally, your BMI, your body mass index, or what percentage of your body is fat, it plays a major role, a significant role at least, in the severity of your symptoms and possible death. That's a big one. Number 2 blew me away. It was anxiety or fear-related illnesses, meaning your fear around it, your thoughts about it, played a significant role in your symptoms and possible death.
Which I think is extremely significant, especially considering the amount of fear that is happening in the world right now around COVID.
Yes.
Like that to me is just one of the greatest ironies ever, that more anxiety and fear actually leads to a greater chance of you dying from COVID. And what's happening? Lots of anxiety and fear.
Yep. So they're scaring the tar out of you, making you believe it's a death sentence. And then when you get it, boy, whoo. This isn't foo-foo la-la. This isn't out there kind of our little opinions or ideas. This is right on CDC saying the second major cause of making it, what's the word?
Contributing
factor of making it worse, COVID death and severe symptoms, is fear.
And anxiety.
Woo!
Which this is just a personal anecdote, so it's a side note, and take it or leave it for whatever it means. I noticed for myself when I had COVID, especially this last time, which may or may not have been the Delta variant, because there's conflicting information on if you can actually test if someone has the Delta variant or not. But I noticed a lot of anxiety and fear was part of my, it seemed like increased doom and gloom I was feeling.
Well,
so, which was
which is
interesting.
true across the board when your body's not functioning well and you're not eating and you're tired and you just have decreased body function
and decreased cognitive function.
Yes, the brain it gets dark. It just does. And there's tons of research on that. Dr. Amen has tons of research on that. I want to jump back and just touch a couple things in my notes here about obesity. It triples the risk of hospitalization. It is increased risk, particularly for those under 65. So age is a factor, right? And we talked about that. Above 69 is the biggest risk factor. But below 65, they said the greatest risk factor is obesity, which is really significant because it gives you impaired immune function and decreased lung capacity.
Because of obesity.
Yeah, because of obesity. Now back to...
Under the age of 65.
Yeah. So that's a big factor. That's a big factor. So anxiety and fear, including in children. I read some things about that as well. That children that are struggling with it are often obese. Because
Wait, struggling with what?
COVID.
Okay.
Because in the United States, I watched this too because I worked with youth for a couple of decades, you guys. And so I watched this trend. And it is 70% of adults were obese or overweight in the United States. And youth were quite a bit lower, but the youth have now caught up. So children and youth are same ratios. About 70% of children and youth in the United States are obese or overweight.
Which is unique to Western cultures
Absolutely.
in general, because we've traveled a lot around the world. We've been on 5 continents, and obesity seems to be a problem that's afflicting mostly Western developed countries like the United States, England, Australia.
Yeah, and
for the most part.
And we'll talk about why here in a second too.
Okay, so I just want to clarify on this because I was a little confused. You're saying that obesity triples your risk of hospitalization and increases the risk for COVID in those under the age of 65. Are you talking about just in general the risk or the risk for COVID?
The risk for severe symptoms and death.
Under the age of 65.
So these 3 things that we're talking about, the obesity, anxiety, and the third one is diabetes with complications. Those 3 risk factors they have found in their research are like those are the 3 biggest ones that are making it way worse. You're far more likely to be hospitalized and have worse symptoms and to die.
So in general, COVID affects those over the age of 69 worse, quote unquote worse. But if you're under the age of 65 and you have these 3 risk factors, you've doubled or tripled your
risk. Yep, and symptoms and possible death. Right? So then on this anxiety thing, I want to lean into this because I love this stuff.
You love anxiety?
I love... No. That's weird. Okay, thank you for clarification because I would have said I love this and you guys, he's psychotic. He loves anxiety. I love studying psychology and I love the power of thought. And I'm going to say something a little bit bold here, but I want you to roll with me on it. Your thoughts can kill you.
Whoa.
This is showing up in COVID, right? Because they're saying the second risk factor for severe symptoms and death is your thinking, right?
Anxiety.
Is anxiety. Well, and they said anxiety and other fear-related issues, right? So I was just reading from...
Fear-related illnesses,
book,
which is interesting because I think what is another fear-related illness?
Fear.
Well, that's just another question.
Right.
How does the CDC define another
fear-related
illness?
I don't know. But just it's interesting. It's a lot about how you're thinking and feeling about what's going on. So I was just reading from the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and I even remembered the page number because it stood out so much. That there was these 2 researchers, 2 women, as I recall, and one of them got a Nobel Prize because of her research. They were studying how stress, and when you're stressed or afraid, or anger plays into this as well, that it releases cortisol into your body. Now, you guys, originally, like in our evolutionary process, right, it was the stress and fight or flight was a momentary thing to save your life. right? It was in an instance where you genuinely are threatened, and you're like,
You're gonna
boom,
get
it kicks in, and you get out of there.
bit by a snake or attacked
Right.
by a
You got to move.
saber-toothed tiger.
Now, where there aren't, saber-toothed tigers,
You
other
can
things.
get cortisol from a comment on Facebook.
Right. And then we hold on to it. And I keep playing it again and again, and I get angry, and I get stressed. I get stressed out because my shoes don't match my outfit or whatever, right? But you see people get stressed. I work with people, and I see this all the time. You see people get stressed about things that, with a
Are
different
not
perspective,
going
you're
to
like,
kill you.
that's not stressful.
Right.
Right.
Whatever take you have on that,
Right.
they're not going to kill you.
Right.
But the cortisol that's being released in your body is actually contributing to aging. Oh, that's what
Yes, so that's what I'm going right
Okay,
now.
yeah.
So, and it's a thought, right? So it's really down to the thoughts that create the feelings, and when those thoughts release chemicals in our body, it changes our biochemistry. And this was by Alyssa Epple and Elizabeth Blackburn. And it says that it wears down our telomeres. Now, telomeres are a fascinating little word. Basically, they're the cap on our DNA that protect our cells. This is significant. They protect our cells from illness and aging, right? And illness and aging ultimately lead to death. So, again, these are important. These telomeres protect our little DNA cells from illness and aging. But they realize, and I'm quoting here, it's not just stress, but our thought patterns in general that impact our telomeres, which these two concluded, and I quote, our cells are actually listening to our thoughts. Whoa, right? And there's so many instances of this, so much research out there abounds, that the way we are thinking and feeling is creating a chemical change in our bodies, which is affecting our immune system.
By affecting our telomeres.
Yeah. So it makes perfect sense that having high stress thinking and feeling, and research found that getting angry, can suppress your immune system from anywhere to 40 minutes up to 2 hours, depending on the research, right? So even getting angry or being stressed or being afraid can suppress your immune system.
Which is ironically now becoming the second contributing cause of death by COVID is anxiety and fear-related illnesses.
Yeah, and not necessarily just death, but it makes it's a higher risk factor.
Exactly.
Isn't that fascinating? Oh, this is fascinating stuff. So you can literally wreck your own immune system with your own thoughts. Yowzers. And then the third risk factor was diabetes. Okay, so now I want to jump in. We've been promising this whole time to give you the list of deaths, and now I want to get into. Did you want to add something else?
No, I mean we could go on about diabetes itself, but we won't.
Yeah, much of it is preventable, right? Especially type 2. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to give you these are just general average year over year. They've been studying this for decades. So on average, just under 3 million people die of all causes every single year in the United States. It jumped in 2020 to about 3.4, if I remember right. And there were pretty significant increase. For example, like I said earlier, the heart disease deaths jumped by almost 5%. They said that is the biggest jump in 8 years. Right? It's a significant jump during 2020.
Heart disease deaths
went up a lot.
Jumped by 5%. And that's not heart disease deaths with COVID.
Right. No, just heart disease. Right.
Disease
yeah.
deaths.
And obviously it's going to play a part in if you get COVID and how it affects you.
Year. That would make sense.
Well, but we're closed in. We're eating differently. I mean, there's so many factors. Yeah. Diabetes went up significantly.
Death by diabetes in 2020.
Yes, went up significantly. Accidental deaths, which, unintended deaths, I think is what they call it. It's actually on the list here. And that's significantly, a lot of those were drug overdoses. Right, so they're playing this role. There was a lot of increases in deaths in general in 2020, not all related to getting or having COVID.
Directly to getting or having COVID.
Okay, so here we go. Heart disease, number one killer, has been for years and years and years, and still is, was last year and still is this year. big time this year. So the average number is, in the 600, and if you average it out, 635,000 a year, which last year was 690,000. Okay, it's most common or more common in men. People, and I want you to listen to this. I'm sharing commonalities.
Why are we sharing this information?
Because this is going to be significant. And this is what really stood out to me when I'm like backing way out and seeing the big picture. And this is our message, you guys, today. There are all kinds of things killing us that we need to remove. And in fact, I want you to.
That sounds totalitarian there. Like you want to just
not force.
remove.
I'm not force.
You want to force people to remove these things from their life.
Let's have that conversation when we get through here. Is there ever a justification to force it? But what I want you to listen to is the commonalities. This is it'll blow your mind here. In fact, I'm gonna get some notes. I'm gonna jot down some numbers as we go along because the numbers are gonna add up. It's gonna be fascinating to do this. So, but you've got to just listen to the commonalities and see if you notice a pattern. And if you don't notice it, I'm going to point it out because it's significant. And this is how I think about it. I'm like, wait a minute. This totally alters the perspective here. So let's roll on. So we're at 635K or more last year, but on average for heart disease. So it's common among people who smoke, people who are overweight or obese, people who have a family history of heart disease or heart attack, and people over 55, okay? Interesting correlation there. Rachel and I love to talk about and geek out about this tendency of you have family history of these things, and there's several of them in here where it mentions that. Family history is very often connected to epigenetics.
Well, right. So there's a more recent branch of science which focuses on epigenetics. Genetics is this idea of like, oh, you have a family history of heart disease, so you're likely going to get heart disease. Epigenetics is actually looking at, and again, I'm not like a scientist, I don't know all of this exactly, but it's looking at the causes of actually turning on those genes, which then give you that disease which you have a family history for, if that makes sense. So what happens on a cellular level is every cell, and this makes sense if you think about it, like in the womb, a baby starts out as like a single cell organism and it divides and divides and divides, and eventually those single cells become every part of a human being. They become ears and eyes and toes and teeth and everything else.
Yep.
And how that happens is epigenetics, essentially, where they receive a signal that says, here's a signal, you're supposed to become teeth. Here's another signal, you become the toes, right? And that still happens in our bodies on an ongoing basis. And so the signals I'm giving my body through food, through my environment, through toxins, through thoughts, are turning on epigenetics, which then say, you get cancer, or you get heart disease, but the amazing thing they're realizing is that we have control over that. Like we have more control than we thought over that.
Way more control than we thought, and we can alter them in our own body. And then here's where it gets crazy fascinating. You pass that on to your children,
right,
to your offspring. So you pass
for
it
good
on.
Or bad.
What? What'd you say?
I said for good or bad.
Yeah, good or bad. So whatever it is, you can alter it. You alter it in your own body, and then you pass it on. So if I'm in a poor state, I'm eating poorly, I'm in a poor psychological state, so it's altering my biochemistry, and I've got all kinds of cortisol receptors on my cells, and things are off in my life. It's really stressful, or maybe I'm crazy afraid, or I'm just tormented by fear of financial disaster or whatever it is. That can be passed on to your children.
And that sounds kind of weird and crazy, but that's what the science is showing. It's
all there now. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, that we're passing on these epigenetic messages, and because of the past epigenetic messages we've received or continue to receive from our thoughts, from our thinking, from the media, from whatever else, we're conditioning and training our body to need more of those things, like cortisol, or
which it then creates
dopamine,
an actual addiction.
Yeah.
And so it's affecting this. So
we can geek out.
Yeah, we could go crazy on this, but this idea of having a family history, like it's playing out, and they're seeing it played out. Even that thing you told me about.
Family history of heart disease is dealing directly with epigenetics, but you're not necessarily going to get heart disease if you have a family history of it.
Because
if
you can alter it.
Alter
Yes.
the epigenetic messages that are being sent to your cells.
Absolutely. Whoa, that was, you just went out there. That was awesome. Okay. Tips for prevention. Stop smoking. Eat a healthier diet. Exercise at least 30 minutes per day, 5 days a week, and maintain a healthy weight.
Okay, so wait a second.
That's...
If we wanted to get into that conversation, which you were hinting at for a second, if we wanted to say the leading cause of death in the United States right now is heart disease, and one of the leading contributing factors to heart disease is smoking, don't you think we would have a case for mandating no smoking in the United States of America?
Well, we're just getting on the first one.
I know, but I'm just...
okay,
I'm
just go with one.
Couldn't you say that?
Yeah, so yeah, couldn't we...
going with one.
Couldn't we... Okay, more people die every day, by far, from heart disease than from COVID and from any other cause. And if the contributing factors are clearly smoking and obesity, well, shouldn't we declare a national emergency? I'm toying this here to put it in perspective. Like, wait a minute.
From every
if it's about numbers, if we're really caring about like the biggest numbers, the biggest threat to lives, shouldn't we do something serious about this? Shouldn't we declare a national emergency against tobacco and against obesity?
Well,
and we know the causes of obesity.
No, Greg, because smoking's not contagious and heart disease is not contagious.
Okay, valid point. It's not contagious. And people aren't deathly afraid of it. And you don't...
Of things that aren't... See, this is the irony, though.
You don't die as quickly.
This is the irony, though, because the more you study about things like epigenetics, the immune system, you see things like what Wim Hof is doing. And if you don't know Wim Hof, like look it up. Look up the research that is being done on this human being. You begin to understand that you actually have more control over the strength of your immune system, which ultimately decides whether or not you
are
contracted disease. Because the world is
Wait, did you just say? Okay, go on.
Yeah, well, the world is filled with bacteria and viruses. They are literally all over the place. You can't escape from them. In fact, if your body was free of virus and bacteria, you would die. You have to have good and bad bacteria in your body to even live and function as a human being. So we can't eliminate all of that. And it's actually the strength of our immune system that determines whether or not we actually get sick. Now, there is so much research on this that if you know the research, I don't think it can be argued. Like, I don't.
Again, coming back to this idea of like, hey, I think we can all agree on this. Your immune system is your safety.
Right, is ultimately the determining factor on whether or not you actually contract an illness passed by a contagious virus or bacteria.
Wow. Now, obviously, you guys, we understand. I can hear some of you right now in your minds going, hey, but some of us have, my family members have autoimmune and other things.
I get it.
We get that. But that's more the exception than the rule. Your safety, for the most part, and again, there's all this talk out there about safety. This is for safety. Your safety relies in your own hands. In your own immune system.
That idea right there has been the foundation of our life. Like, we build everything in our life about.
Exactly.
We never look around and say, hey, you know what? It's your fault. Like, we're always taking 100% individual responsibility for our own lives, and that includes our health.
Exactly.
Because we know ultimately it comes back to our immune system.
And so for me, I can't speak for anyone else, but I can speak for me and for my family. We are not at risk at all of dying from COVID. I don't need anyone at all to step in for me to protect me from it, because my safety is in my immune system and it's in my hands.
Now, again, this might, for some people, based on where they are in this, understanding of health and different topics like that, this might seem extreme. But we can only make these statements now because we've literally been studying and researching these ideas
decades.
For at least 15 years, possibly 20.
Easy 20, because Rachel's dad got ill the day after our very first date, and he got colon cancer.
No. He had already been ill.
Okay.
He got diagnosed with...
Like that week.
cancer, within the week of our very first date.
Yeah.
He was given 3 to 6 months to live. He actually lived 2 years.
And his oncologist said, hey, this is because you have diverticulitis and then colon cancer because of the way you've eaten, because of your lifestyle.
So that put us on a path from the beginning of our marriage to dig in very heavily to researching health, well-being,
Immune
systems, like cancer, all of this stuff. Like that's been a part of our journey and path because of that. So you're right. So we've been researching it for at least 20 years.
And I started when I was 16 going hard. So by the time I met Rachel, I had already cut out all kinds of junk and junk food and all that stuff.
So that's the only reason I feel comfortable making that statement now, despite the politicization, how do you say that? The politicizing of COVID itself as a topic, I still feel comfortable making that statement because we have been researching that, experiencing it, and living it for so long.
Right. Okay, let's keep going. So number 2 cause of death is cancer. And just shy of 600,000, just barely shy of 600,000. So cancer, it is more common in people of a certain age, people who, here it is again, who use tobacco and alcohol. Okay, again, we're looking for common denominators. We're looking for patterns.
Common denominators of
major causes of death
in the United States
that are preventable. Right, mostly. So exposure to radiation,
why?
sunlight.
Why are we doing this?
Because I feel like there's something we can do about it, something we should do about it, and it changes. If we pull back and look at all the major causes of death and look at the actual numbers, and say, wait a minute, if there's something we can or should do, why aren't we looking at other things? Why aren't we emphasizing those things that are actually taking more lives every year? Why aren't those getting as much or more attention since more are dying?
Or at least equal attention.
Yeah,
I think
at
that's
least
a
equal,
fair point.
Right?
Equal
More of dying,
attention.
but it gets equal attention? I mean,
Okay,
right?
but whatever.
It's a fair point. But you see what I'm saying? Like, there's something to this. So let's keep going. So radiation and lots of sunlight. Chronic inflammation. Oh,
Ooh,
man.
Interesting.
Do
We could
not
go into that.
make me go off on that one.
Don't make us go off on inflammation.
One of the major sources of inflammation, you guys, is sugar. Refined sugar is a major inflammatory. So chronic inflammation. And cells do not do well in inflammation.
Like I said, don't even get us started.
Don't get me started. Okay, here it is. People who are obese and people who have a family history of this disease.
Which deals with the
So
epigenetics.
are you seeing the patterns? So just with those 2, you guys, that's the
Top
top
two.
2.
That's almost, I mean, they're saying
It's 1.235 million people
almost
per year.
half of the deaths every year in the United States. So 23% on heart disease and 21% on cancer. I mean, not quite half, but close to half of the deaths in the United States have the commonalities of smoking, obesity, family history, which relates to epigenetics, and
Alcohol.
and inflammation.
And inflammation.
Okay.
Wow.
Now,
Well, and sugar is a contributing factor for heart disease and cancer, interestingly, right? In fact, you can do your own research, or I pulled up a page here of the things they know, like this long list of things, like they know these things are contributing to cancer. They know it. And they still
we are
approve
gonna talk about that. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, as a non-geeky numbers person, can we summarize this, or do we have to actually go through every one of them?
No, let's keep going.
Okay.
Well, I'll go fast. I'll go faster.
Okay.
So, again, prevention, maintain a healthy weight. There it is again. Eat a balanced diet. Exercise
smoking.
regularly. Quit smoking. Drink in moderation or not at all. Dr. Amen says even a little drink of alcohol each day, so in moderation, he says, creates divots in your cortex, in your brain, and it limits cognitive function. Regular screenings, all kinds of things like that. Okay, next, unintentional injuries. We talked about that. It's usually in men, people ages 1 to 44, so it's lower risky jobs. But this one, the only one I want to...
This includes motor vehicle deaths.
Yep.
Unintentional injury.
But it also includes, in another thing I was reading on CDC, I believe, it was saying that there was a big increase of overdoses. And
So
that's playing
I
a
want to
part.
know, does something like unintentional injuries include things like medical malpractice where
No,
that
because
what? Wait, hold on. Maybe this is not related at all, but it's an interesting statistic because I remember reading one time that it was actually medical. Is malpractice the right word? Medical
mistakes.
That was actually the
Third.
Oh, it's third.
Yep.
The third leading cause of death.
Yep. At 200.
Which would make sense. This goes under accidents and unintentional.
It came out
injuries.
medical mistakes came in at like 250,000 a year. So it's not even on this list.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Which included like the wrong prescription amount for drugs or unintentional mistake during surgery or giving the wrong
diagnosis,
diagnosis.
Wrong treatment.
Okay, that's a whole nother
massive
thing.
So interesting. That's not being brought up or addressed, or that's a lot of people. Okay, next one.
So sorry, just for those who might be getting bored with the numbers.
I'm gonna go.
Can you remind?
fast.
Why are we doing this again? Remind us.
Well, I'm gonna let me get the number here. So
trying to
chronic
get a
lower
total
respiratory diseases is 155,000. Okay.
So you're not including the accidental deaths in this.
No,
because
I'm not.
You're trying to look at
I'm looking at preventable things. I want to look at total deaths that are pretty preventable, right?
Okay, again,
so
smoking.
Women, age over 65,
History
smoking.
of asthma. Lower income households. Now
Right.
that's fascinating.
So they're breathing poor air.
Mold,
moldy,
likely,
yucky
which
air.
is very toxic.
Okay. All right, go down. Now this one is where I wanted to hit. Stroke. You're like, oh man.
142,000.
Okay, stroke. Stroke just happens. 142. Making the numbers
This
here.
was actually shocking to me that stroke is more common among men and women using birth control. Wow.
Interesting. Wow, that's second on the list.
As a woman, I never even knew that was a thing, that using birth control could increase your risk of stroke. Like, no one tells me that.
You're right. People with diabetes, right? Now, if it's type 2, there's something you do about it. People with high blood pressure, there's something you do about that. People with heart disease, there's something you do about it. And people who smoke.
Oh, wow.
Do you notice that list? We're already down to number 5, 142,000.
The leading causes of death.
And most of that is preventable. So what does it say? Maintain a healthy weight, exercise more, eat healthier, manage your blood pressure, stop smoking, drink in moderation, manage your blood sugar levels, back to sugar there, and treat underlying heart defects or diseases, right? And then it gets into Alzheimer's, diabetes, right? And type 2 diabetes is different. And then we'll go to, let's just stop right there. So I'm gonna just pull this number just so none of you get too bored with us geeking out here. I'm doing some math now. And wow, wait a minute, hold on. Yeah, 1.5 million people die every year. Okay, those are staggering numbers. 1.5 million people die every year. Many, I wouldn't dare say all, many if not most, are preventable.
Well,
and there's common denominators. You heard them.
Well, common denominators for contributing risk factors and common denominators for tips for prevention.
Yeah, exactly.
Smoking, losing weight, eating healthier.
Wait, you just put smoking on the prevention.
I'm sorry. I got
smoking, losing weight, drinking some more, exercising only a little bit.
I'm sorry. You know what I'm saying, though.
That's what I wanted to point out here.
Though, fascinatingly enough, is also directly related to contributing risk factors for COVID.
Yes. Ooh, including, here I found this on the CDC, it was fascinating, the vaccine.
Wait, now you're kind of jumping to
I know. I just want to jump to stroke real quick because I thought about it. I don't want to forget it. It said, I want to read it because it was so interesting the way they worded it. That
you have to scroll down.
Scroll down right here. Yeah. However, and I'm quoting directly from CDC. However, reports indicate a plausible causal relationship between the vaccine.
Well, it is specifically
the J&J.
J&J vaccine. And what's TTS?
I don't know.
Sure what that is.
And a rare and serious adverse event, blood clots with low platelets, which has caused deaths. So that's a really indirect way of saying this vaccine causes blood clots.
Has caused
which
blood clots.
has caused blood clots,
It's caused
which has caused deaths. So it's like this indirect way of saying it's not responsible for deaths, it's responsible for blood clots. And the blood clots are responsible for the deaths. Right?
That reminds me of a funny story when I was a kid. My dog went out and attacked a rabbit, and it died the next day. And my grandpa said, "Oh, yeah, that dog killed your rabbit." And my mom was like, "No, the dog didn't kill the rabbit. It died the next day." It's just chewing on it, right?
It wasn't the dog. Okay, so why are we even talking about this? Why are we bringing this up? And those of you who are healthy and fit and in here and like all this and just considering this, I just want you to wrap your heads around all of this. Zoom way out with us. See the big picture. Like, what is this all about?
See it from a non-political perspective.
Yes, take a different angle and a different approach, and really start asking yourself, like, wait a minute. So if it was less than 400,000 people died in the United States from COVID, and yet
last year,
in 2020.
But
and
within
this is
the whole time it's been 676. I just have to keep the numbers straight in my own mind.
So if you just look purely at numbers, and I get it, I can see the other sides of the argument.
Nothing.
No, it's not. It's something. It's a lot. It's a lot, and we ought to do something about it if we can. So we're not discounting it.
We can.
We definitely can.
I think we can. The biggest problem is people can't agree on what we should do.
Right, and I think discussing this and zooming way out will actually help us make better decisions about what to do.
That always helps you make better decisions. Like, I don't know of a time when that doesn't help you make better decisions by zooming out and looking at it from a broader perspective.
It's interesting to me that during the same time period, 2020, 1.5 million people died in this country. So over 3 times the amount died. What are we doing about that? Where's that attention?
Right.
And that's a much bigger problem. If over 3 times as many people are dying, and we're really concerned about that, and it's a real threat to our nation, should we start mandating exercise? Should we start making it illegal to be over a certain BMI? Should we make it illegal to smoke or use tobacco?
Now, and we're going to be clear here, we're not saying we should do that.
I'm just asking those questions.
I want to just...
You have every right to be fat and to smoke and
eat at McDonald's if you want to.
Yes, and to die a slow, painful death. You have every right to do that.
Well, I also find it fascinating that there's those 1.5 million people that died, not because of COVID, but by conditions that also contribute to a higher risk of death by COVID.
Yes.
So to me,
actually addressing those issues would
address all of the
lower,
issues.
COVID dramatically.
So to me, when it comes to something like the vaccine, which is supposedly what this podcast is talking about, but we haven't actually talked about that yet because we're giving the back story, which is critically important. The vaccine may or may not be one of the solutions to combating COVID. But more importantly, why aren't we looking at these other factors that are contributing to the deaths by COVID, but are also contributing to 1.5 million other deaths in the United States?
Exactly. So if the greatest risk factor for COVID is obesity, well, guess what? It's also the greatest risk factor for heart disease and strokes. And I mean, there were several other instances there and cancer.
What was cancer?
Like those are the biggest problems. So wait a minute, we found a common denominator that if we address that thoroughly, and what if that was on the news every single day? What if that was getting the same amount of attention in the media, from the government, from leaders, from all kinds of people, religious leaders, political leaders, organizational leaders, businesses now, everyone over 100 employees has to mandate certain things. What if they mandated
a certain weight?
Fitness. Yeah, what if they mandated
or a certain diet?
Like you've got to be at a certain BMI to work here.
And again, we're not saying that's a good solution because it's not a good solution. Anytime you start mandating things or forcing things to happen, that is, from our study of history, like we discussed in the last podcast, that is on the path towards authoritarianism and totalitarianism, which rarely, if never,
it doesn't turn out good.
Have a good outcome in the end.
I talked to my buddy the other day. He's a total history buff, and he's like, oh yeah, I've read the instances like that. That's never pretty.
Right.
It never turns out good. Right.
It
It's a
doesn't.
disaster. All right. So with that background,
This is getting long now. Like,
yeah, let's just hit it quickly. With that background, I want to address this idea and just give it. This is our perspective on.
Well, I could
Considerations.
say right now, with that information as a framework, I think if someone seriously thought through all of those issues we just mentioned and differing perspectives, that could be a lot of information to help you rethink what you already think about
Yes,
certain things.
absolutely.
That by itself.
Could be
And
enough.
again, you may come to the same conclusions that you have, whatever your political, philosophical, religious conclusions are, right, about the politicized issues at this time. You might come to the same conclusions, but I think those conclusions are going to be more well-rounded and more balanced if you at least consider all of these other perspectives.
Yep.
That's kind of the point.
Absolutely.
And maybe if you ended and didn't listen to anything else now, that
would be
could be
worth
enough.
it. Right.
Right.
But
But Greg wants
I want
to
to share a few things.
Okay.
Just again, people ask like, well, how do you think about the vaccine? And so with that's
How
the
do you think about
background.
the vaccine?
Yeah. How do you think about it?
Okay.
How do you
Maybe
think about
that
it?
is
What's
a
the
better question,
process?
because instead of saying
What do you think about
the
it? Say,
vaccine,
how do you think about
how?
it?
Because
Yeah.
we're trying to learn how to think, not what to think.
Right.
So that's a good.
So
way
we've
forward.
given you this huge long background about how to think about it and other things.
Well,
but I want to
it's
address
key. We don't come to any conclusions unless we think about all of the contributing
Yes,
conclusions. There's
exactly.
multiple levels of thinking. Like
Yep.
there's first level thinking, second level thinking. Like all of these different levels of thinking have to go into coming to any sort of hard and fast conclusions about
Absolutely.
something. If there is a hard and fast.
exactly, and then
Yeah.
that you may not even get to hard and
And
fast.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't even say at least me, you might be different. I don't know that I have a hard and fast conclusion about the vaccine itself. I think it's a very complicated topic involving many
And so many
complicated individuals.
and so many variables.
And so many
I'm with
variables.
you. But I wanted to address a couple of things, particularly this idea of it's safe and effective, right? It's interesting even when you stop and you look at those words. Like my first response was, what does that even mean? When you say something is safe and effective, like what does that mean? Like some people would consider
And
it
that's not just-
irresponsible to use such vague terms to a huge audience on differing levels of education and
Well,
understanding.
and that's not like splitting hairs there. I think in any extremely complicated subject, you have to define the meaning you give words. Well, and we see this all the time in our coaching, in
Oh
our
my goodness,
counseling,
all the time.
in communication with
In marriage, you're
Right.
like, I say a word and it means
Communication,
something to me, and it's like, that means something totally different to
Yeah.
me.
So in order to have better understanding, even in your marriage, we often have to give definitions of what a word means for us.
Right.
So if I'm like, hey, I really need you to make me feel safe, like I have to define what that
Do
means
I go
for
put
you.
on, like I go get some weapons, I pull out my knife and guns, and like,
Right.
I'm a protector. And she's like, no.
No,
like,
that actually
I
makes
wanted
you feel more scared.
Right, she's like, oh, I'm not dead. And I come back all armed, and I got a helmet on and everything. I'm like, I got you, babe.
didn't make you
and
feel
I just
safe.
bought another dog. And she's like,
And I'm
I
like,
wanted
no,
to
I
feel
wanted you
safe
to
emotionally.
Listen to me
Yeah.
and accept
want-
my feelings.
Yes, I
right?
wanted to
That's
be able
the
to
kind of safety I'm
be
looking
vulnerable
for.
with you, and you would listen and not judge me. I was like, oh, so I
So-
can put my gun away?
Yeah. So it really is a key component to further and to adequately understanding an issue is to understand the definition of the words
Yes.
being used.
Exactly.
So that's one of the first things we always ask is when somebody gives some sort of explanation for something, we are always saying, what does that mean exactly? Like define the words.
So, when you say those words, safe and effective, literally in front of hundreds of millions of people, and don't really back it up,
Or define what that means exactly
as you're presenting
as
it,
you are using them.
you have to know that you are throwing it out to individual interpretation. And depending on where people are at, some of them are going to interpret it in a way that is dead wrong, right? and
Assuming there's a wrong.
Yeah, assuming. Well, yeah. Okay, well, here's an example. I know people who heard these words and they automatically assumed that the vaccine would prevent them from getting COVID
Okay.
and it would prevent the spread of COVID.
Depending on how they defined safe and effective for them.
So somebody said safe and effective, like, boom, I'm getting it because I won't get COVID and I won't get sick and it'll stop the spread and this will be over. Like in a couple of months, no more COVID.
That's their definition of what
safe and effective
means, which may or may not be the definition that other people are giving it.
Now,
we don't know.
Nobody knows. Sure. I'm going to safely assume that the people who are speaking know. And I think, again, coming back to, I think something we can all agree on. I think we can all agree that the vaccine is not preventing people from getting it because people who've been vaccinated are still getting it.
Right.
And
it may
is
inhibit
not
them somewhat from getting it.
Right. It might help, but it's not preventing it totally. And it's not preventing the spread. Which we're seeing in countries who are either completely vaccinated or mostly vaccinated, it's still spreading like crazy.
I don't know if there's any countries that are 100% completely vaccinated.
I talked to somebody the other day, and they said there's a couple of small nations that...
Really small ones?
Yeah.
Because I heard the highest vaccinated ratio was Israel, which was like I think 80%.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And yet it's new variants are spreading like crazy, like wildfire. So now we're not talking about whether it helps or not, and that may be the definition of effectiveness, but I know some people believe this will stop it. This will be the end. And they're also believing that, like, if you don't do this, you are a murderer.
Well,
and that's
those
an extreme.
Are
that's an
extreme
right.
cases, extreme viewpoints,
right.
of course, but we have seen that out there on social media of people. In fact, I even just saw something of some woman who put it in, well, I guess she didn't technically put it in her own obituary, but her family members put in the obituary that it was because of people who were not vaccinated that she died from COVID. Now, again, that's an extreme viewpoint, and in the end, that type of extreme vitriol, I guess, is a good word to, because I don't think you're making a statement like that from the goodness of your heart, right? With trying to have empathy and understanding of people who have differing viewpoints from you. Like, that doesn't help us. That doesn't help us find solutions. That doesn't help us find answers. That doesn't bring us together as a community, a society, to solve a common problem that tears us apart. Which ultimately, if we'll just touch on this, maybe we can do another full episode on it, but just touch on the point of anytime there's more division and more separation, and then you add intense emotions and hatred, and you just keep fueling that separation and division, ultimately it leads to some form of civil war. I was in an advanced Krav Maga class this morning, and they told us about that just happened just over the weekend in Atlanta. A group of about 40 individuals went in, and they're purposely bombarding, like mobbing police officers with really annoying things to try to get the police officers to react, to pull out a weapon, to fire a shot. They're just doing everything they can to get them to react. Right. Which that's like, oh my gosh, that is the beginnings of civil wars and skirmishes, if nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. Which then it's a tinderbox. It just explodes. It's crazy. Okay, but I just want to hit this thing, and then we'll wrap up here. I think we can all agree that to declare something safe, we have to unequivocally rule out death and harm and damage. Right? Is that
well, no, I'm going to disagree a little bit because something.
I'm going to disagree with you.
I didn't even give my point yet. You can't.
I'm going to disagree with you disagreeing. Go ahead.
Because I would say that we could define something as safe that was, say, mostly safe. right?
Okay.
Because sometimes we're going to say something is safe if it's mostly safe.
Okay, why not use that? Why not, if I'm going to stand up and I'm going to talk to millions of people and say, you guys, this is mostly safe. That's very different than saying this is safe.
Right.
Right? Because if it's mostly safe, and what is that from Princess Bride? Mostly, right? If it's mostly safe, that leaves a margin of error for some people to say, you know what, I'm not willing to take that risk, even if it's small.
Right.
And we allow them to do that.
Right.
So
But
as
others
of
would be willing to take the risk.
right.
Because, right. So, I mean, and I think that happens a lot with almost everything we do in life. Like
Right.
driving on the freeway is mostly safe. But it is also
Mostly.
deadly.
Right.
Well, in fact, we were going to do skydiving, and I did my research. It's actually more dangerous to drive on an average freeway in the United States of America than to go skydiving. And so I thought, wow.
Changing perspective.
Change in perspective. I'm more likely to die driving to the grocery store than I am to die from going skydiving. So I decided
Let's
to go
skydiving. Changes
because-
perspective.
Yeah, it changes your perspective on it. That I was suddenly like, it's not that risky. Actually,
You shift your whole paradigm,
Exactly.
and now you make a different decision. Instead
Right.
of skydiving's so dangerous I could die, you're like, well, actually, you're far more likely to die in a car accident. Which isn't this the point of this thing? We're so terrified of COVID, and it is. I mean, people are dying. I'm not discounting that, but over three times as many people died in 2020 from other preventable causes than from COVID. So if you want to be afraid of something, be afraid of that. Ooh, but let me come back to the safety
I get it
thing.
though, because at the same time, if someone chose to use the word safe about driving, I don't know that we would argue the nitty gritty about that. Although you could say, well, it's safe, but really it's mostly safe. I mean, it depends on how detailed you want to get.
Right.
Which in a situation like this where it's very politicized,
And it's very intense. It's very in front of everyone.
You do actually need to get into the nitty gritty to
And
really get a clear
Let's give
understanding.
them some numbers and say, you know, if I'm reporting numbers and say, hey, look, this many people died today, but interestingly, 3 times as many people died today from these causes. Something worth considering, right? You can't dismiss this. But back to the safety piece. We've talked to some people and they're like, I haven't heard of any deaths from the vaccine or any negative things. It's not been heard at all. So it's interesting.
And maybe that is the majority perspective, that any reports, whatever, of death or injury from the vaccine are simply conspiracy theories.
Right. And they're not.
And yet, on the CDC website itself, as of, what did it say?
September 13th.
September 13th?
Yep.
There have been 7,653 reports of death from people who received the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, now, again, that's not like 400,000 COVID deaths, right? It's a small number, and some people might say, well, that's going to be that's going to be worth it in the end for us to all get the vaccine. And that's a point you could argue. But if no one's made aware of that,
right.
For one thing, like many people we've heard of or know, they don't even know that any deaths are happening. I think that's also not fair.
Right.
Like, that's not just to kind of hide that information while emphasizing the other information.
Yep.
So in some ways, that's the point we want to make, is it should at least be talked about.
Right. And not just death, it's some kind of, I don't know how I can't remember the word they used. It was some kind of medical harm.
Right.
And last we read it was a good month ago or more, it was over 450,000 cases of some kind of medical harm caused by the vaccine.
Yeah. I don't remember those exact numbers because I didn't look it up. But I did look up, because the CDC gets that information from the VAERS website. Like, that's their source. And I went up and looked on the VAERS website, and they have data from, like, the 1960s on vaccine deaths. And for most of the period of time, it goes month by month since the 1960s. And I looked through all of it. And for most of the time, it was like 10 deaths.
The highest one was like 52.
Maybe 52 deaths in 1 month, right?
This is over decades.
This is over decades.
And decades.
Until December 2020 when it jumped up to
1,200
hundreds and then thousands. And so you can look at this information yourself. Okay, that's something at least. That's something that we should at least be aware of if we're going to make a decision like this, that it directly impacts our own health and well-being and that of our families.
Yep.
All I'm saying is that information should at least be made available instead of portrayed as a simple conspiracy theory.
And as though it's not happening.
As though it doesn't happen at all.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And the last little thing, this one gets me fired up. Because, yes, it was approved by the FDA, right? But interestingly...
a lot of things approved by the FDA.
The good people down at the FDA approve all kinds of things.
So wait, where was that?
All kinds of garbage chemicals in our food that are known and proven to be linked to cancer and obesity.
Where's that website for a
and
second? So
all
we can
kinds of
reference
problems.
that. Because that is one of the other challenges. And this ties into not just what's happening with COVID right now and the vaccine. I mean, this is a viewpoint we've had for a while.
Yes.
Just in our lives.
Well, literally 20 years.
Since my dad got cancer.
Exactly. So that's coming on 21 years in December.
One of the things that he discovered, and we discovered while we were trying to understand this disease he had that eventually took his life, was that not everything FDA approved is safe for your body. In fact, some of the things that are FDA approved are actually known cancer-causing substances.
Yep. And they are outlawed and banned in other countries or entire continents like the EU. Like they're don't allow it in because it's linked directly to cancer, and the FDA puts their stamp of approval right on it. And there's 2,500 chemicals in our food that's being put in there. Yeah. And
that
preservatives
are FDA approved.
That are FDA approved.
Now, one of the things you found that was fascinating was that about the oils, the unsaturated oils, that there are actually hydrogenated oils. So the U.S. FDA banned partially hydrogenated oils in January of 2015, but they gave them 3 years to remove the products from the market. Okay, now wait 1 second. You're telling me,
wow, this is killing people. You have 3 years to get rid of it.
That something is giving people cancer, but then tells people the companies
or heart disease or whatever.
Whatever,
else, right?
yeah, all of the things that lead to the leading causes of death, and then says, "Oh, but you have 3 years to remove it." What?
Right? This is doing harm to our people. Make sure it's gone within 3 years.
And I get it. That there's a whole process for everything that has
Except
to be done.
at what point are we going to get serious? Because they're getting serious now, right? Seem to be, right? But what point are we going to get serious about other things? So just for kicks and giggles here.
Why can't we invoke some sort of emergency authorization for something like
for
that?
Hydrogenated oils.
Hydrogenated oils are causing
MSG.
disease.
Yeah.
Let us
Done.
emergency
it is
authorization
banned.
to ban it from the country.
Yeah, not coming in.
That's my line of reasoning. Like I get it.
And
But
actually
my thinking says why don't we apply that same thinking to other challenges and problems?
And
now,
I'm in favor of some bans like that because that's not forcing people to work out. It's not forcing you say you can't smoke, but it's like, hey, let's get these deadly chemicals out of our food that most of the people have no idea are harming them.
That's true
It's
because you're
innocent
not. It's
people.
not like people are addicted to. Well, maybe they are to
MSG. They are
hydrogenated
and oils. Yes, those oils are deadly.
But if you replaced it with something like coconut oil, like most people aren't even going to know the difference if they're buying chips.
Well,
they're not going to know.
Let's hit some of these right now. So interestingly, you guys, there's a thing. I won't even try to pronounce it, but it's BPA. It's a chemical that's it's lined your cans.
Well, like the
canned
whole thing,
foods.
There was a big move for the BPA to be removed from plastic bottles and stuff, but it's lining...
in canned foods, and so it's been linked to cancer. We've talked about this refined sugar, guys. Even back as early as 1931, they found sugar was providing fuel for tumors and inflammation. This stuff can I make a plea with all my heart and soul here?
You're going extreme here.
Cut sugar out of your life.
How can we cut sugar out of our lives? Like, how can we do that? That's just too much.
She's kind of in jest, but kind of like she has a sweet tooth too. No, she
I
does
replace
great.
sugar.
Yep. So we replace it. So we use erythritol, which is sugar alcohol, and our favorite is monk fruit extract. And yes, it is way more expensive than sugar, but not in the long run, because sugar is costing you an enormous amount of. It's affecting your brain.
And
and your
who
health.
knows, one day research might come out and find those things are actually not good for us either. But at this point,
Well,
the research
I guess
is...
that's true. We go along with as things progress and we find things out.
Mm-hmm.
So alcohol consumption lowers your risk. Alcohol abuse is a leading cause of cancer behind tobacco. So tobacco use is the leading cause, and alcohol abuse is what they're calling it, is the next one. French fries and potato chips.
What?
Yep.
French fries and potato chips? What are you
It's
talking about?
I don't even know how to pronounce this. Acrylamide is a chemical used in those industrial processes, right? It's also found in cigarette smoke.
Whoa.
It can form starchy foods like potatoes when they're cooked at high temperatures, right? More research is needed here, but the American Cancer Society supports continued evaluation of this in French fries and potato chips.
Okay, so we're geeking out a little bit here.
Let's just do it
what's the
fast.
point, though?
Processed meats. Again, well,
You
all
just
these
like
things.
to geek out.
I love to geek out and give you tools because you're like, and people ask me all the time. My clients ask me, everyone I talk to, like, okay, what can I eat? What should I eat? And at least we can give them a baseline of like, don't do this. There's direct links here of at least correlation, if not causation, to like cancer and health problems. Like you can do something about this and take more control back in your life and boost your own immune system and take your own safety back into your own hands.
So maybe what the message is here really is that we have this big global scene of what's happening on a world scale, or at least a national scale, of these top discussion topics of vaccine, no vaccine, mandates, no mandates, like all of this stuff is going on, but ultimately we're saying it comes back to you.
Individual responsibility.
You have individual responsibility to take more control of your life.
Right.
No matter what else happens.
Yep.
And ultimately, and this is my belief, I think this is your belief, that the only way to
It is now that you say it will be.
But now that I say this is your,
yes, dear.
you're taking it on. In order to solve any of these problems, the polarization, the division, the why can I not say that word? Politicization of issues. All of that is solved when we, as individuals, within the nation, within the world, accept personal responsibility for our own choices, our own actions, our own decisions on what we put in our mouth, for one thing, as an example, right? Until we take our own responsibility for that, nothing else is really going to change or make that big of a difference. And when we decide to not view others as bad or wrong simply because they have a different viewpoint than us.
Well, that's where I was going to go. Because you're saying the solution is individual responsibility. Well, what about those who won't? What about those who won't take individual responsibility?
Right.
Should we then force them? And I think you're going there like, well, those who think differently than us, think act differently than us, they hold on to those issues. Is there a point where you step in and I, for the most part, no.
I think based on our own life experience, our own research, our own background, no, you can't force people to do it.
And so ultimately,
you have to take individual responsibility, and that responsibility includes
having
grace
and
allowing others to have the viewpoints they do.
And to make bad decisions and suffer the consequences.
True. And if there's going to be a way to change that, it comes from us being able to gain and develop diplomacy,
influence, persuasion,
inspiration, all of those things. That is what, because it's not that you shouldn't try to change someone's viewpoint if it clearly seems wrong or harmful or detrimental to society as a whole. Like, we should try to influence others to gain a different viewpoint. But that should be done, first of all, through influence, through tact and articulation of topics and ideas and understanding and empathy and respect, viewing someone else who has a different opinion as valuable a human being as we view ourselves, right?
Right.
That's the only way I see it changing.
Right. And preventing, if we don't change it, it could lead to a big disaster.
Well, yeah.
And so we want to prevent it.
If
This
we-
is preventing the problem by having that grace and tolerance, allowing other people to make their decisions, and keeping this big perspective. Yeah. And
No.
not eating microwave popcorn. I gotta share the list, babe. I can't.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I gotta do it real
I
fast.
would have thought that
So
would be a good place to
I
end.
know
but
it was
you
a
just-
beautiful place to end, but my mind, I'm like, I have to share.
You have to share about microwave popcorn.
Processed meats, like lunch meats, bad. Mass-produced bread has potassium bromate linked to cancer. It's not even like a warning label in California, but it is banned in the EU, UK, Canada, and Brazil. Artificial colors, all this food coloring stuff. Microwave popcorn has a PFOA that lines the packaging and comes off in there, linked to cancer. Hydrogenated oils, charred meats, farmed salmon, soda or pop. Right? A Swedish study found that if you drank one 11-ounce soda a day, you were 40% more likely to develop prostate cancer. Holy guacamole. Red meats, pastas, other things, GMOs. Okay, that's it. I had to do it.
You just had to add that
I
in.
just had to add it. That's
Because
my
why?
nerdiness.
But
Because I'm a
explain why.
nerd. So come back now. We'll finish with the principle.
Well, but you want, like, I want you to explain the motivation of why you want to add that. You feel like something like this is at least
it's in
we
our
can
power. Yes. Like you're sitting there going, okay, what can I do today to
not get
to do
COVID and
this?
die.
And you're like, okay, done. No more soda. No more microwave popcorn. No more processed
Yeah, that's
meats.
easy. You could start there.
And I'm like, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do everything I can find out to take care of my immune system so that I and my family are safe and healthy from
Safer
whatever
and
comes.
healthier.
Yeah, safer and healthier. And we lean into it and then share this. Like
Wait,
I'm
you-
sharing because I want to inspire people. I want to motivate people. I want to give them tools and strategy. So many people make their life so hard because they're using the wrong tools,
They have
or
the wrong framework.
they got the wrong framework. They got the right tool but no leverage behind it, or you could be trying to pound in a nail with your screwdriver, or you could use a hammer, or somebody could show up with a really awesome nail gun and be like, bah, bah, bah. Like, what? Let's go. And I want to give people tool and power like that so we can live exceptional lives.
And it starts with small choices,
Yep.
small decisions.
Exactly. And then spreads to our kids, our friends, family, and
the community.
any circle of influence. And it has to,
That's the only place it can start.
or we head to an absolute train wreck. So this is exciting. Isn't that exciting? Today, I hope you guys are just giddy. Maybe you're even dancing right now. Today, you can decide never to drink soda again. Today's the day when you throw away your microwave popcorn and never have it again. That's exciting.
And people are going to be like, how did this podcast about vaccines lead to cutting out microwave popcorn? Like, where does that
Because it all fits in the
all
big
connected.
perspective. It really is. All right. This is good. Thanks. If you listen to the end, holy cow, we love you. When we see you in person, you're getting a big hug from us because that was a long haul and allowing us to
And
geek out.
hopefully it made sense in a way.
Yeah, just zooming out and altering our perspectives, and you can use that strategy
With everything.
everything in
and
life.
anything.
Yeah, love it. Love you guys. Reach upward.